Hello, this is Julian with Coffea Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Alpes 276WX wash processed Panama from Coffea Circulor. And there's the bag right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Gothenburg, Sweden. And their coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel quite a bit as they continue to release coffees that catch our interest, including this one right here, as this is a washed Panamanian geisha from the Jansen collection. And given that we've had recent positive experiences with both the Jansen as well as Coffea Circulor Panamanian geishas, this coffee felt like an ideal one for us to review. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 41. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee. So as we've alluded to in some of our recent Coffea Circulor reviews, we've actually found these coffees to be a slight bit more developed than a lot of the coffees that we have had from them in the past. This one is no exception to that, as you could feel a slight bit more development than we've typically associated with Coffea Circulor's coffees, though this one still remains on the lighter side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the cup is on the very clean side of things with some mostly subtle characteristics, including a soft citric component to it. A slight bit of herbality to the cup, though it did feel like there was much more from this one going forward as it was expected to open up. It just essentially radiated a lot of potential from this first try, as it was a little bit more in line with that kind of generic, too early to consume Panamanian geisha-like component. Day 18, through the Chemex, and the cup was very different from the first try, as on this day it offered a lot more of the dark berry aspects that wasn't necessarily in line with any of the descriptors, though I think the thing I felt it was closest to was maybe the listed fig note. Honestly, it just felt like a little bit more of a darker berry attribute to it, as it reminded me a bit more of red grape. In addition to that, plenty of the citric brightness is also present yet again, as it does continue to feel like there's going to be a lot more from this coffee going forward. Just another okay day. We continue on to day 21 as we opted for the April brewer, and the coffee was the best it had been by a distance at this point, as it's offering greater clarity with much more of a fresh fruit feel, in line with the listed apricot note, though that wasn't something that I necessarily got a lot of in this coffee throughout. There is still more of the slighter dark berry tone to it, but it does open up a little bit more in a strong floral honey aspect once it does cool down. A much better day overall. We continue on to day 24 as we opted for the V60 with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and it's a slight bit different, as you can feel a variety of characteristics ranging from the vintage Coffea Circulor herbality to a little bit more of those honey-like traits, so a little bit more of that kind of bergamot-like feel that I typically associate with a lot of Coffea Circulor's coffees. Dark berry is still ever present, as it kind of deters the cup from reaching a full level of clarity, as there's just a slight bit of a darker feel to it, which is something that I'm insinuating when it comes to the roast profile of this one. A bit more of some citric tones on the cool down, but it essentially felt slightly uneven on this day. Continue on through day 27 as we opted for the Chemex with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and there were definitely trade-offs to this one, as it felt like there was a slight bit more intensity to the cup. The citric intensity as well as the darker floral aspects were definitely much more present on this day, as there's an even slight honey bitterness to it. So I got a little bit of increased intensity overall at the cost of maybe some of the more enjoyable notes that we'd experienced earlier on. Continue on through day 30 with the V60 and Coffea Circulor's recipe, and it continues to offer a bit more intensity than expected, as there's a better balance of sweetness, at least in terms of the floral sense, but there's still a lot of the darker honey and darker berry aspects, so the coffee in general is improving. Continue on to day 33 as we opted for the Chemex with our standard recipe, and this is the best it had been to this point, as there was much more of the fresh fruit components in line with the citric geisha attributes as well as that apricot-like note. Once again, not something overly pronounced throughout this coffee, but on this day a little bit more subtle and present. There is a little bit more of the darkness to the cup, as there's a darker honey and darker berry aspect that continues to remain consistent. Those were the two things that I would say most of the time was a little bit more on the consistent side of things, especially that berry-like attribute, which once again, maybe that's the fig that I'm looking at, but I couldn't necessarily find it to be anything that's particularly in line with a lot of the notes on this one. Day 36 final notes, we have one more try through the Chemex, and it continues to remain the best brew method, as it's offering a little bit more clarity focused on the citric components of this cup. It has reached a level of consistency as well in terms of the honey, but in general, it continues to improve incrementally with every day. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. We have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4, and that's probably the most important one to discuss given that this is a washed Panamanian geisha. So when it comes to washed Panamanian geishas, I do hold them to a very high standard and always want them to score a level 5 in terms of the clarity. But this one, as you can see in the rest of the tasting wheel, we'll just kind of address this real quick, was slightly marred by some darker aspects of this one. There was an ever so slight smoky quality that was present within this. And in addition to that, the berry aspect of it did feel ever so slightly, I want to say, fermenty. So as a result, that held it back from achieving and reaching that true level 5 status in terms of the cleanliness. Honestly, it's a little bit more of a true level 4 than anything else. I could see this one being something a little bit more processed than just a standard wash processed coffee, given that it is a Panamanian geisha, as it didn't necessarily hold up a lot of the cleaner aspects that you can expect from Panamanian geishas. Finish, level 4. This one definitely offered a lot more of the darker berry aspects within the finish. There was a little bit more of those floral components on certain days, but for the most part, it really seemed to kind of finish in that, I'll say, slightly more processed sense, as it's something that I experienced with maybe slightly more processed Panamanian coffees. But given that this one was washed, I wasn't necessarily expecting to achieve or reach that level of kind of slight fermentiness to it. So level 4, I feel like is the best place to put that. Definitely not anything in terms of an overly intense finish to it. Sweetness, level 4. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how I want to go about describing the sweetness, because the sweetness in this one also felt somewhat moderately toned down. I feel like this one was the bare minimum of reaching that level 4 mark in terms of the sweetness. It did offer some slight, I want to say, grain-like qualities in terms of that citric aspect to it. And in addition to that, the fruits that were present within this one, again, that citric component as well as that berry fruit component, I think that they were just a little bit more on the slightly sweet side of things when it came to those fruit aspects. So level 4, maybe a slightly lower side of level 4, especially for some of the Panamanian geishas we've had from them in the past. Florality, level 4, mentioned that a lot. Dark honey, that's another thing that goes in line with the sweetness, but that was an ever-present quality within this one. I can't recall whether or not they had any note like that listed on here for this coffee specifically, but it was something that continued to remain present within this one. Grapefruit, level 4, and once again, I don't know if that's the fig that I'm tasting or what it is, but it just feels like a darker berry aspect within this coffee for me. It's not particularly tart, so that wouldn't necessarily lend itself towards maybe being a little bit more of a mixed berry, like a darker berry, specifically like a blueberry sort of aspect within this one. Though at the same time, it had that ever so slight fermenting quality to it, and that's why I didn't necessarily have great definition in terms of the berry sense. It just had that ever so slight fermenting berry component to it. Citrus fruit, level 4. Yeah, there's definitely a fair bit of citric qualities within this one, a little bit more in line with that expected sort of citric quality you can expect from Panamanian geishas. Don't necessarily have too much to add to that. We have quite a few level 3s though. We'll start with the acidity level 3. As I continue to mention, a lot of it might have to do with the way that we brew these Coffea Circulor coffees. Not the brightest coffee, definitely a little bit more medium in terms of the overall brightness to it, so that plays a role in this one. Stone fruit, level 3. And I was able to get a little bit more of that fresh fruit component, though honestly it reminded me a little bit more of a slight peachy quality as opposed to the apricot-like note. So level 3 does seem fitting for it, maybe a little bit more subtle, not always the most pronounced or present component within this coffee, but enough to score it a level 3 for it. Body level 3, surprisingly more medium bodied than I might have expected as going into it, especially given that it's a Panamanian geisha brewed with the Chemex. I would fully expect that to be on the lower side of things, and it's going to be kind of interesting because we're going to be discussing another Panamanian geisha from Coffea Circulor as well. I was brewing these two coffees side by side, and I couldn't help but notice that this one just had a little bit more body than I might have expected, so level 3 is a pretty surprising note within this tasting wheel. Outside of that, I'm not sure that there's anything else worth discussing. I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I think it goes without saying that when a Panamanian geisha does not score a level 5 in terms of the cleanliness, it's going to be very hard for it to compete with some of the other ones that I have enjoyed in the same category. And given that Black Pearl WX as of this moment continues to remain one of, if not my favorite coffees of the entire year, Coffea Circulor has set the bar extremely high in terms of their Panamanian geishas in the past. So this one right here, not necessarily my thing. It went in a little bit more of a direction that I wasn't necessarily expecting. As going into this one, I had some extremely high expectations for this coffee, and I do have to say that it just didn't end up being up to those standards, as this one, just not necessarily my type of Panamanian geisha. I do look for stuff that is a little bit more subtle and definitely a little bit more clarity than this one did offer. So this one, just a little bit of a one-off for me. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I feel like if you do like the darker aspects of your coffee and you're looking for them in a little bit more of a clean sense, because this one still offered a little bit more clarity, especially given that it is a Panamanian geisha. And this one seems to be a pretty good fit, as it still offers some of the Panamanian geisha-like characteristics, florality, as well as the citric components to it. And in addition to that, it just has a little bit more depth with some of those darker profiled aspects, giving it just a little bit more of a diverse and different Panamanian geisha in general. I think for the most part though, that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Alpes 276WX Wash Process Panama from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.